Good morning, everyone. My name is Miranda Stiers, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am the Prevention Program Manager with the partnership. I'm going to have my colleagues introduce themselves. We can go ahead and start with Kimmy and then move to Melody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimmy Remus, she, her pronouns, and I am a prevention specialist here at the partnership.
Good morning, everyone. I am Melody Crispoden. I use she, her, ea pronouns, and I am also a prevention specialist with the partnership, and I'm calling in from Los Angeles on Tongva land.
Thank you. And I'm joining from Nisenan, Miwok, and Medio land in what is now Sacramento. And I want to give a moment for our presenter to introduce herself. Diane.
Good morning, everyone. I am Diane Gout. I am the Director of Impact Strategies for the partnership, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from the Abenaki Dawnland Confederation, Wabanaki, and Paquaket peoples' ancestral homelands, and that is in Maine.
So a couple of things just for housekeeping. We do have our ASL interpreters joining us for today. Live transcription has been enabled, so you can always turn on the closed captioning. If you are having any trouble with the audio, you can switch to click the little chevron next to the audio and you can switch. You can also start your video if you want to be on camera. If you don't want to be on camera, that's fine. We are recording and this will be available for everyone shortly after the webinar. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat. So we're going to start with our opening circle, and today's topic is enhancing your prevention evaluation toolbox with Dr. Diane Gout, and we're very excited about today. We also acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and homelands of California Natives people and Maine folks, as well as Baltimore, Maryland. And we encourage folks to be aware of the land and properties that you are living on. Want to get a sense of who is joining us today. So in the chat, please type in your name, pronouns, agency, and your location. And we'll put a link in the chat so folks can add. Oh, perfect. Kimmy, you're already ahead of me. I appreciate that. If you're wanting to know whose land you are occupying, you can click on native land and be able to pull that up. Want to encourage folks to interact as much as you can. So as those are coming in, I want to keep us moving forward. I'm going to stop my screen open. So folks, let me know if it's opening correctly. Are you able to see the website? Okay, perfect. So we have our annual membership meeting that is coming up soon, and we really want to encourage folks to nominate folks for the virtual awards that we'll be hosting. So you can nominate up to May 6th. We're going to put this link in the chat for everyone. And we really want to celebrate those who have challenged those root causes of domestic violence and infused equity in the way they've engaged survivors and their communities. We have some different awards that are available for the beloved community, and recognizing that we are part of a bigger we and intentionally standing in that intersectional solidarity. We have our Culturally Responsive Award, representing California's rich diversity, the partnership as a connector and a network weaver. We promote collective strength through reciprocity and interdependence. We know that we cannot do this work alone. If you want to nominate for someone for equity who has shifted power so underrepresented voices frame our approach, or for bravery, we embrace discomfort, taking informed and inspirational risks to disrupt the status quo. The nomination forms are available in English and Spanish, and we will be putting those into the chat. So we look forward to seeing those nominations. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Diane.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we're really excited about about this presentation on logic models and timelines. And a lot of times when people are thinking about logic models, they get a little concerned. And if you Google them, you're going to see a whole variety of different types of logic models. And some of them can be rather daunting. And then some of them can be fairly simple, but regardless of the type that you use, that you choose for your work, they're really essential, not only as being a part of an evaluation plan, but also more of a roadmap for your project. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how they can be used in evaluation, what they are. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And the conversation's pretty free-flowing and casual, so we can take questions at the time that you have them, providing time allows. And then you'll have another opportunity at the end of the presentation. So let's see. When we're thinking about what is a logic model and how will it help us in our work, logic models are visual methods of presenting our work and presenting that work for our programs and our projects. So I've created them at a lot of different levels. One level is through for each of the projects that I've worked on. And then we've also done them for a program. So if we have a department within an organization, we might have a logic model specifically for that department. And then I've actually worked with organizations that have created them for their overall organizational goals and objectives. And so they'd have them at all these different layers, because in a lot of ways, they really are, like I said previously, roadmaps. More and more federal and state funders are requiring them as part of grant proposals. So I've seen that a lot with some of the grant reviews that I do. And generally they're created at the onset or outset of your work. And they, again, sort of guide your initiative, your project as you're going through. So this is a template that I created a few years ago because what I found was that when people were going online and finding the different models that they could use, that they often got themselves confused because just of the way that some of the pieces interact. And ideally, because prior to my work with partnership, the majority of my work was in tribal communities. I'd worked in tribal communities for the past 22 years. I find that the best logic models are actually circular, because if we're working through them in the way that we're supposed to, then each piece will relate to the next piece. And then we'll get back to the beginning, and then that'll feed the next round of work that we're planning to do and how we might alter our goals and our objectives. And so they're fairly simple when you look at the way they're laid out. And so, for example, in this one, we have a situation, and then we sort of give the context of why we're doing this project, or why we're we have this department or our organizational piece. But really I'll spend most of my time talking about projects, is why do we have this project, and letting just the reader know at a glance, if the logic model is done well, you're going to know exactly what you're planning to do and how you're planning to do it within just by looking at the template that you have here once it's filled out. So what your overarching goal is, this also helps you when you're thinking about your planning and your implementation. So then when you're thinking about evaluation, that's when you're going to get towards the end of this. So what's your overarching goal? What do you hope to accomplish? And then how do you plan to do that? So your inputs, how many staff do you have? What kind of budget do you have for this? Do you have community partners that will be helping you with your work? What are all those different pieces that you're going to bring into those inputs that are going to help support your work in this? You might even have in there what the time frame is. Then you're going to have your target population. So who are you planning to work with as preventionists? A lot of times, we'll use youth here. So your target population might be youth, and maybe it's a particular age group. And you would put that, so as detailed as you can get with the logic model, then the more benefit it's going to bring to you in doing your work. So then you're going to have your objectives. And so that's, what are the things, the different areas that you're going to identify to support your overall goal. And I'm going to have an example on the next page. And then your activities, each objective that you want to accomplish is going to have activities related to that objective. And what are those activities? What are the things you're planning to do? And then the outputs, and this is a lot of times where we end up stopping with a lot of our work, is we stop at the outputs, because the outputs are the easiest thing to capture. And that's our counts. So the number of trainings we do, or the number of interactions we have, or the number of people we serve. The outputs are really sort of, it's the count. How many meetings did you have, that type of thing. And then the outcomes can be short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And generally speaking, for projects, we're looking at short-term outcomes, because a lot of times trying to track people long-term is quite challenging. And so, but the outcomes are the things that we're going to look at as to really, it's basically the answer to the why did we even engage in this project? What was the purpose of it? What were we hoping to achieve? And this is going to tell us, this is where we're going to be able to do that in our outcomes. And every single one of these pieces have to be measurable. So when you're thinking about, when you're writing them, the thought that's always in your mind should be, how do I measure this? Is this measurable? Is this something that is distinct enough that I can measure it? So if you're holding a training and your outcome is people are going to be more informed, then how are you going to measure that? Because more informed about what? What exactly did you want them to walk away with? And so making sure that everything that you have is measurable in your logic model. And then at the end of this, I always like to have assumptions. So sort of the thing that I'm working with, this grounded assumption. And for this particular example, I have that addressing violence against Native women is complex work, which requires specialized knowledge, strong collaborations, and an understanding of sovereignty in Indigenous ways. Your organization possesses such attributes and is a powerful community resource for our Native women and children who are victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking. So it's sort of that basis of why all of this work is important, is that grounded piece. And so that's why I sort of have that at the bottom, because I feel like those assumptions are what holds up our work. So it's an example. For this one, it's a justice program goal. It's sort of to think about providing overall, the goal is to provide culturally sensitive services to American Indian, Alaska Native victims and increase awareness of teen dating violence. And so that's our overall goal for the project. So then when we look at what are our inputs, this program is a nonprofit. It's a fictional program called the Justice Program. We have a board of directors, we have our program staff, and we have our operating budget. And so those are just a few of the things that you could put in there. You could add things like, here we have 3 volunteers, but you also might add community partners that will be supporting you in this work, and other things, maybe different types of equipment. Sometimes people will include equipment they have. So just thinking about what those inputs might be. And then we have our target population, which we basically identified in our goal, our American Indian, Alaska Native youth. And then we have our objectives, and I made it very simple here. So these objectives, in order to meet that particular goal, are develop and deliver an array of services to victims of teen dating violence, coordinate services and strengthen partnerships with local schools and youth organizations, and then develop and deliver community awareness and public education. So those are our objectives that are going to support us in meeting that goal. And then our activities are related specifically to those objectives. And you can see that it's the, to develop and implement trauma-informed care model and practices, provide opportunities for clients to participate in cultural ceremonies and activities. And you could have more, but these are, again, just examples. Develop collaboration with local middle and high schools and youth centers, formalize MOUs with identified partners, and create youth task force. And then create a prevention campaign, host community education and awareness events, and provide education and awareness. And then our outputs. And again, those measurable outputs are, the things that we can count. So we're going to serve at least 30 youth victims by the end of year 3. So it's always good to sort of have what you're planning to do and by when you're planning to accomplish it. Because again, if we're thinking of this as our roadmap, we're going to go back to it. And we're going to look at it again and say, are we on target? And this isn't something you just do one time and then put it away. It's something that would be really beneficial to bring out every quarter or so and say, okay, how far have we gotten? And are we encountering any barriers or any challenges, any obstacles? And then that's when you can sort of rework and try to figure out how to move past those, right? So those are our outputs. And then when we start thinking about our outcomes, we're thinking about an increased identification of AIA and youth victims of teen dating violence. We can measure that. An increase in awareness of teen dating violence and healthy relationships among youth in middle and high schools. So then we can measure that. We can do surveys. We can ask, is to identify if there's an increase in awareness. And we can have, there are different surveys out there already that measure healthy relationships. So we can utilize some of those or create our own. Enhance the skills and practice of staff teen dating violence. So for the staff around teen dating violence, increase in awareness of teen dating violence among educators and community members, and then increase in participation of youth survivors in cultural ceremonies, classes, and activities. And so those are some of the outcomes that we could actually measure. And then if we wanted to go a step further in that measurement of those outcomes, let's take number 5, for example. What we might want to do is not only is it an increase in participation in their cultural ceremonies and classes, but maybe we want to find out how that impacted them. So getting to the actual true nature of the impact of our work is what was the impact of being able to participate in those cultural ceremonies. How did that change things for them? Did it change the way that they view their relationships with one another? Does it have a positive effect? And so that would take us, a little bit further into the intermediate and maybe longer term outcomes. So logic models for evaluation. So when you're thinking about how do they get incorporated into your program or your project evaluation, and at the end of the day, what we really want to know is what difference does our program or our project make? And that when you're thinking about it from the onset, it can be rather daunting, and particularly if you're a smaller organization that doesn't typically have a lot of resources available, is sort of thinking about how do you engage in this. And if you start at it from the beginning of your project, it's going to be a lot easier than trying to get to the end of the project and go back and try to recapture what you did. Maybe it's a 3-year project and you're like, okay, so what did we do in the last 3 years, and try to do what we call sort of retrospective data collection. And that's not ideal. Sometimes you have to do it, whether you want to or not, but it's really not the best way of being able to conduct your evaluation. Because I think for a lot of us, not just myself, but hopefully I'm not in this boat alone, but I can barely remember what I did last week. And if you ask me what I did 3 years ago, I'm probably really going to struggle. And even those of us that are as intimately involved with our program as we can be, we're not always going to remember all of the nuances that occurred throughout the administration of our project and our project work, right? So in thinking about that, the logic model gives us an opportunity to not only look at the implementation of our work, but the beginning of our work and the process of it, and so starting at that very beginning stages. So, we're able to look at, did we have problems when we started to implement our program? And that can be anything from maybe you're a brand new program and you're going to a project and you're going to hire staff. And you think you're going to get that staff hired in the first 2 months. And what we're finding out right now is that, it's taking a really long time to get people into staff positions. And we have significant turnover. So even if you have people in positions, there's a chance those people can leave. And then that's going to delay the activities of your project. And so having your logic model allows you to go to that and say, well, we didn't get as far as we thought in the last 6 months. And the reason for that is because, some of our first activities around hiring didn't happen the way we thought they would. And so being able to sort of pinpoint that and identify that is very helpful, particularly when you have to report back to your funders about why there is a delay in your accomplishing your identified objectives, right, and activities. So your logic model for your evaluation is going to help you identify if your program or your project's on the right track. So, and addressing the right issues. So you might be thinking you're addressing one thing and something else pops up and you're like, oh, okay, so maybe we need to rethink some of our activities. And maybe we need to do more work around community building. So we're not going to be able to pull that task force together quickly because we still need to work with some of our community partners and develop stronger relationships. So we have to step back for a second. Are the tasks that you're engaged in, are those the ones that are going to help you accomplish your goals? Or are you doing things that maybe you're not getting a lot of traction on and you need to step back? So if you've built something on maybe having this really strong coordinated relationship with law enforcement, for example, and 4 or 5 months into it, you realize that you haven't even been able to get meetings with them, then you might have to rethink, are we engaging in the right approach, or do we need to rethink this? And is there another way to go around this? Because this is really delaying us and we're not getting as far as we thought we would. Thinking about the difference it's making to your clients and to the people you're serving. So, this allows you to look at that when you're thinking about your outcomes, the difference it's making in the communities that you serve, if there again are any barriers or gaps. And at the end of the day, the whole point of all of the work that we're doing, and particularly when you're doing evaluations around that work, is how can we do this better? Where are the places where we can improve? And what are we doing really well? But once we identify what we're doing really well, then we're going to dig a little deeper and say, and how can we do maybe some of these other areas a little bit better? So are there limits to what a logic model can accomplish? And of course there are. They can't always account for unintended consequences. So they're created based on our best understanding of what we hope to accomplish. And with the activities that we think are going to get us there. And again, like I've talked about, we might have to revisit those activities. They should always be considered working documents. And that's why I say, and I reiterate this all the time, you don't do it once and put it away. You do it and keep bringing it out and looking at it and examining it and making sure that everything's lined up for you. And, that allows you to sort of change them in real time, as opposed to, again, getting to the end of your project and going back and saying, well, we weren't able to do half these things. They didn't make any sense. And being able to sort of readjust those. The other piece of that is you might have a logic model for one grant, and then you reapply for your next grant, and you bring out that logic model and you say, okay, well, 4 of the 5 things worked really well, but this last thing didn't really work like that. And these were the challenges. And maybe then you, through the process of that whole project and your evaluation of that project, you identify some new things that you want to approach, and you can add those to your new logic model. So, I stress to people that, much of what we do in our organizations is built upon not only the success of the plan, but the competence and dedication of our staff. And so, we have to have that staff present for this to be valuable to us, right? If we don't have enough staff or we don't have the right people to be able to do the work, then the logic model isn't going to fix that for us. And the best models really begin with results. So meaning we really, when we're thinking about what we're writing, we're thinking about what we want to accomplish. And then we work our way back from there. So all of us in this field have ideas about the sort of the transformation that we want to be a part of and that we want to help, right? And so with that, thinking about what is it you really want to see happen? How do you want to transform the way people think or act or feel, or any of that in around the issues that we're addressing? You come up with that and then you move backwards, and that's how you develop your best projects for your programs, is on the idea of the transformation you'd like to see take place. And so those are a few of the limitations when we're thinking about what a logic model can accomplish. So as part of the logic model is, to me, is really, and a lot of times this gets left off, is the timeline. Because you can have your logic model and you can have sort of a vague timeline. So usually what I see is people will have a 3-year grant and they'll say, year 1, we're going to do this, and year 2, we're going to do this, and by the end of the grant, we're going to accomplish this. And that's really hard because it can't really hold you to really being able to look at the activities and identify where you might be having challenges. And so the size of the timeline generally depends, and totally really sort of depends naturally on the project and what it is that you're planning to accomplish. Some timelines can be very, very highly detailed and have, every activity you can think of included in the timeline. And then some are a little more generalized and maybe don't have everything in there. So for example, you might be, one of the activities would be to hire, have hire a staff person. And so that might be the only thing you put on the timeline. But then you might have, particularly in some communities where recruitment and hiring takes a lot longer, you might have things in there under the activity of hiring somebody is develop a job description. And for some federal grants, you need to get that job description approved. And so you need to allow time for that. And then you need to allow time for posting the job. And then you need to allow time for interviews, and then hiring, and then onboarding. And so once you start laying all of those pieces out, you get a much different picture of how long that process can take, as opposed to just putting in there, hire staff person month 1 or month 2. Like in reality, it could take you 3 to 4 months to get somebody hired, depending on the conditions that you work under when it comes to hiring people. So these timelines can generally take be a standard format of a timeline, and the most utilized standard format is called a Gantt chart, and that's how a lot of people do them. And really, the Gantt chart, it's sort of an easy to grasp visual, and it uses horizontal bars and it goes across, and I'll give you an example of it. But the timeline should include all of these elements. So the lists of tasks to be completed, the dates on which the tasks need to be completed by, the expected duration of each task. So how long do you think you'll be working on that task? And then it's good to identify which tasks depend upon the completion of other tasks. So, it's hard to, the example I'll give is a project I've worked on where we're developing specialized sexual assault services that are contingent upon hiring a counselor, sexual assault counselor, and that person has not been hired. So it's really hard to have these other tasks. You can't to develop the services if you don't have the person in place that can fulfill that, right? So this is just the example. And this sort of provides a little bit of an idea about how detailed they can be. Some, like I said, are not quite as detailed. They might only list major activities. However, again, the more detailed it is, the easier it is to identify where you're running into issues. And so again, when you're thinking about here, providing the specialized services, when you're thinking about the implementation piece, then you need to have that person in place to be able to provide those services. And if that doesn't happen, then it really derails the rest of your work. So along with your logic model, even more importantly, is you should be bringing your timeline up every couple of months and saying, okay, where are we at? And particularly, this was a project that started actually pre-COVID. And so we had all of these really great ideas about what we were going to accomplish. And then one of them being focus groups and being able to get into the community and hold those focus groups only for COVID to happen. And then that didn't happen, right? So then we had to go back, we had to rethink, how can we actually get the information we need for the needs assessments? We're not going to be able to do these focus groups. Those focus groups turned to interviews, individual interviews. Those individual interviews turned into a whole lot more time. And therefore we had to rework our timeline. Being able to rework that timeline is of value because you can respond to your funder and say, this is the challenge that we've now encountered, and this is how we are addressing that challenge. And this is what the extension might look like. And so it gives you sort of that data piece of being able to support any changes that you might have in your project or program activities. So in thinking about this, the thing to remember, I always tell people logic models and timelines are your friends. You know, they can feel really, you know, like I said, extra work, but that extra work is going to save you a lot of work, particularly in your evaluation pieces as you move along. You know, being realistic means that if your program provides services to victims, you can't have an outcome that addresses offenders. So making sure when you think about what your outcomes are going to be, that they're actually related to the work that you're doing. The other piece of that is, are you going to be able to gather the data that you need? So if you're relying on data where you've got to go and find people that have connected with your program and then disconnected with your program, then you really need to think about, is that a possibility? Are we going to be able to go and find them and gather the information that we need to be able to determine whether or not, you know, our work was effective? You know, did we do what we thought we were going to do? Long-term, like I said, outcomes, if you're trying to follow up with people 3 to 5 years later, that can be really challenging, particularly in this area, because people move. They move, they change phone numbers, they change jobs, they leave the state. And so sometimes being able to go and gather that information can be a bit of a challenge. So making sure that when you're thinking about your outcomes, definitely focus on your short-term outcomes. And if you can focus on other ones, then that's great. That's a bonus. But let's at least make sure that we're able to measure our short-term outcomes. You also need to be able to commit real resources to evaluation work. So that's oftentimes not the thing people want to think about, because, you know, they have this other work that's really important. So, you know, if you're, you know, for the preventionist, it's like being able to be out there and do that work. That work is the work of being able to make the real change and be able to make the real impact in people's lives, is being able to actually do that work. And evaluation for a lot of people doesn't necessarily fit with that. They're like, why do we want to commit resources there when we should be committing them over here? Same thing with victim services programs. We want to serve victims. Why do we need to take the resources, time, and money to do this evaluation piece? And at the end of the day, the valuation is what's going to help you continue to get funding and to get more funding, and to also be able to identify how well the work you are engaged in is being transformative. You know, are you making the difference that you want to be making? And the only way to do that is by evaluating that. And you do it with everything else in your lives already anyway. It's not as though you're not already evaluating stuff. You know, we're constantly evaluating every aspect of our lives, whether or not we want to try to get healthy, or, you know, just even the best route to take to get to work, right? It's like you're constantly in a process of evaluation. So this isn't a new concept, but it is something that if it's done well and thoughtfully, that it's going to help propel your work and your program forward, as well as helping to, ensure that, the funders understand what you're doing and to potentially get more funding for what you're doing. So again, being careful not to confuse activities with goals and objectives. So that happens a lot. Generally speaking, I tell people that we really have one goal if it's a project, and then everything else is an objective. So it's sort of like, what's that transformative piece we want to see happen overall? And then everything sort of flows from there. And our activities are just things we're going to do to get there. It's the steps we're going to take to get to that space, right, of what we're trying to accomplish. Being realistic, you want everything that you're doing to be achievable. So, if you're setting a goal to, your goal of your project that you have is to end teen dating violence, you might not get where you want to be by the end of your 3 years, right? That's a goal that's not necessarily, it's definitely something we all hope to see happen, but for your one particular project, that's likely not going to be the thing that does happen based on your one project, right? And so making sure that when you set those outcomes up that you want to see, and your goals, it's those things that you are achievable, that you're going to be able to accomplish, because if they're not, then you're basically setting yourself up for failure. And in your logic model, when you're looking at that picture of what you're planning to do, you're going to say, well, how am I going to, you need to be able to answer that question. We have a saying in Maine, you can't get there from here. And so one of the things you want to be able to say is, how am I going to get there? I have that goal, I've identified it, and does everything else that's in this chart, and this lovely little chart in front of me, show me the direction for how I'm going to achieve that? If the logic model is not working for you, it can be reworked. So there's nothing to say that you don't have these great ideas at the beginning of your project. And as you move into your project and you become more involved with your project, you go, wait a second, this actually would work better than this, or this is a better measurement than this, or we should be engaged in these activities and not these. You can change it. It's okay to rework it and to fix it if it's not working for you. The timelines are a great visual resource for keeping you on track. Everybody should have them. They are sort of the lifesaver. And if you, especially, I said with this, the way things have changed for so many programs in the last 2 years, you've constantly had to rework and readjust. And I think that's shown us that we can do that, and we can still do really great work. And being able to document that. So part of that evaluation piece is being able to document all of those challenges and barriers that came up for us, but then turning around and also documenting how we overcame them. Because every bit of our work sets the tone for the people coming up behind us and leaves that record for them to see what we encountered and how we addressed it and how we moved past it, right? And any evaluation work, to include developing logic models and timelines, should be a team effort. This type of work is not based on what one person does. So even if you don't have people in your organization that are evaluators, or you have somebody you're bringing in from the outside who is, they shouldn't be working in a silo. They should be working in coordination with your program. So even though I'm an evaluator, that's the majority of the work I've done lately, and that's what a lot of what I do for the partnership. I don't do that by myself. I have to meet with every single department because they're the experts in the work and in the field of what they're doing. And so they have to inform my efforts. It's not something where I can come in and tell them, this is what you have to do. It's the same thing if you bring somebody in from the outside. Every single evaluation effort should be a team effort, and it should be a participatory effort. So make sure that, and the more people you have in it, I think that people actually start to enjoy it. It becomes less daunting. When everybody has a voice in it, then they get to take ownership over the work. And so this process, again, should always be engage everybody. So that is the presentation on logic models, and we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Diane. And I want to encourage folks, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute. If you would prefer to put them in the chat, you can absolutely do that as well.
I have a question. This is Morgan. I guess my biggest struggle with the pandemic and stuff and not meeting those goals or activities that we put in our logic model or action plan, when those things can't be implemented due to the hardships of the pandemic, how do you explain that to community and the people you're trying to help and support? Do you have any recommendations or maybe explaining like hardships in doing that? Because I've experienced like not meeting those goals, and yes, I can rework the logic model in our plan, but community was also expecting these things, so it's kind of hard telling them like, oh, we have to kind of take a step back and redo some things. So yeah.
What we did was we sent out notice and to the community through the community newspapers and let them know. So for smaller communities, that's really easier to do, but just sort of saying, this is, well, we also announced the project. And so it sounds like that's what you did too, Morgan, but is then going back and saying, because of these reasons, this is how we've had to rework this. We haven't forgotten about you. We're still committed to doing this work. And this is our new timeline, or this is our adjusted timeline. And hopefully that's going to work, that the pandemic gives us a break, right? And we're able to get in there and do the work that we're so committed to doing. So transparency, I think, is really key in that process of letting people know that, yes. And I think particularly because of the pandemic, when people ended up being locked down and not being able to get out, and, it was easy to feel isolated. And then, the last thing we want is people to feel forgotten, right? And so that process of like, just reinforcing you're still there, you're still committed to the work, and it's going to take a little moment extra for you to get to the place that you want to be, but you're still committed to getting there. And so that's how I would approach it and have approached it, but I'm not sure if others have ideas.
And one of the conversations that we've been having with a lot of folks as we've been moving through the pandemic is having to readjust how you're defining success. And so being able to go back to your logic model and look at what were our goals, what were the things that we wanted to put together, and what have we still been able to accomplish? How have we been able to adapt to that so that you can tell a story of how you have continued to do this work? It doesn't necessarily look the same. You're not necessarily reaching the same numbers, and you can still do really phenomenal work. We've seen some really amazing innovations that folks have been able to do through the pandemic to make sure that they are still able to reach their goals and reaching out to their community. And looking at some of the kind of non-standard partners that folks can connect with to be able to do that work.
I'll also tack onto that sometimes when we run into people who are asking us for technical assistance, okay, how do I do this now? We'll ask them what they have done, and then they start listing so many things that they didn't realize, like, wait, all this stuff counts. Wait, I actually have done a lot, because it's really easy to get in that mindset of the things you're falling behind on, the things that just aren't working the same way. But we've seen some amazing innovations of how people have pivoted, or it's even more impressive the work that has been able to be done considering the environment. So sometimes being able to sit down with someone or even just write a list for yourself and spell out, like, what did I do? You'll realize how much there actually is. So that's just another pitfall that I'd recommend avoiding.
absolutely what we talk about with that strength-based approach is looking at what have you done well as where have you struggled. But really start thinking about what have we achieved and what are those steps that we've taken.
And communicate that. So if it is the community that you're working with, and communicate that. So while we haven't been able to do these things yet, we have been able to do these things. And, you know, and this is what this is allowed. And so that process of saying, you know, of just letting people know, yeah, we might not have been able to do these things that we initially set out to do, but, you know, we've innovated and we've pivoted and we've, you know, been creative. And these are the things that we have been able to achieve and to be able to engage in. And so, and that also encourages other people to think outside the box, right? And that's what I'm saying with like that, your logic model is it doesn't have to be this, you know, grounded in cement thing that you can't go back to and say, oh, then we're going to rework this because, you know, we weren't able to do these things, but we're able to do these things. So we're going to add those in, and being able to capture that and then communicate that to your communities, to your organization, and to your funders. Are there other questions or thoughts people would like to share?
And I did just share the notification around the partnership awards and the link for that. That's not to stop anybody from asking questions. Absolutely, just want to make sure we get that out before. I know some folks may have to sign off. But any questions, feel free to come on camera or to unmute, however you want to do that.
Well, it sounds like everybody's set.
And absolutely, if you have questions, then please feel free to reach out to our partnership team. We are going to put our names in the chat, and we will be sending a follow-up email with a recording of the webinar as well as the slides this afternoon. We will have a brief survey, as we have been talking about. Evaluation is incredibly important. So we look forward to hearing your responses. And if you are wanting technical assistance, know that we have a wonderful team here to be able to help you with any of your technical assistance needs, whether it's prevention, intervention. We know there's heavy intersections. We look forward to hearing from you. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now.